Hello viewers, thank you for joining me. A few months back, I mentioned I'd been finishing a lot of series I wanted to talk about in some extra videos, in addition to whatever new anime I'm watching at the time. You might notice a bit of a trend with these, as I've been reading the manga for a lot of series whose anime I already reviewed. This isn't something I used to bother with too much. With so many stories to get into, I've typically stuck with one or the other. But I've come across so many series that I loved, but which were incomplete as an anime, that it was really only a matter of time. Today I'll be talking about the manga for School Live, which I was in the habit of calling by its Japanese title, Gakko Garashi, back when I reviewed the anime. Unlike my recent video for The Royal Tutor, where the anime was mostly complete and there were just a few key points I wanted to discuss from the manga, this one will be more like a second season review, as there's still so much story to get through after the anime ends. Be warned that I really want to talk about this ending. I don't think you can properly get into the main themes of the story without getting into how it all wraps up, so be prepared for spoilers all around. To recap the story up to where the anime leaves off, School Live brings us into Megurigaoka High School. One of our main characters, Yuki, is bubbly, a little childish, and a proud member of the School Living Club, a group of 4 girls who live here at the school full-time, getting by on supplies from the school store and the garden on the roof. And most importantly, helping out wherever they can to make their school days the best experience they can possibly be. Her clubmates consist of Kurumi, the energetic, athletic one. Club president Yuri, or often just Ri, is the big sister type, always looking out for the others and often taking on more than her fair share of the stress. And underclassman Miki, who's the serious, bookish one, a little reserved and slow to trust. And of course, we can't forget Megune, the young teacher who acts as their club advisor, and who the girls see more as an older sister than a real authority figure, as evidenced by her nickname. This series originally presents itself as a light-hearted slice-of-life show, but by the end of the first episode, or chapter, it's revealed that this ordinary school atmosphere is all a delusion Yuki's projecting, so she doesn't have to acknowledge the truth. That they're living here at the school because it's a shelter in a world that's been almost completely destroyed by a zombie apocalypse, and that Megune has been gone for some time. She died protecting her remaining students in the early days of the disaster. Yuki's delusions set up an interesting conversation. What rules of society are essentially dead once the world has ended? Miki joins the group a little later than the other 3. They find her stranded at the mall while out on a supply run, and she really struggles to adapt to Ri and Kurumi's contentment with Yuki's hallucinations. She has the same knee-jerk reaction and I suspect most of the audience did, that it's a problem that needs to be fixed, something she needs to be woken up from. But the girls are really just surviving here, not actively planning to go out and try to find other survivors or a cure or rebuild civilization. Spoiler alert, they'll end up doing all of those things. But for the first phase of this story, the half the anime covers, they're just ordinary kids who somehow managed to make it past the early days of a global apocalypse. With a future so uncertain and a present so bleak, does Yuki really need to see things for what they actually are? She was too depressed to be of much help before her mental break, and the way she is now is helpful in its way. Once Miki starts to accept that these girls don't have any more plans or answers than she does, she starts to appreciate that it's nice to have someone around to lift everyone's spirits when things get dark. Ironically, sometimes Yuki's energy is the only thing keeping everyone else sane. But this peace can't last forever, of course, or we wouldn't have much of a story. Hidden in the teacher's room, the girls eventually find a secret manual revealing a few key things. The major shock is that someone in charge knew an event like this could happen someday. Unfortunately, it was kept under such secrecy that by the time the regular teachers would have been informed about the emergency preparations, it was too late. The manual also confirms some suspicions the girls had about just how convenient it was that their school was already equipped with things like solar panels and a water purification system and just a wide range of things that wouldn't normally be found in a school store. Megarigaoka High School is one of a few places marked on the map as an official shelter in the area. Furthermore, they see there are additional basement floors here at the school that should have extra supplies, food, and even an experimental medicine that might be able to save someone if they catch the infection early, which becomes necessary when Kurumi runs into a zombified Megune during her first expedition down there, freezes up, and gets bitten. This point is the big climax of the anime, with Kurumi out of commission and Ri starting to lose it a bit over potentially losing another friend. It's up to Miki to take up the shovel and fight her way down to the basement to find the medicine, and above ground, Yuki finally has to come to terms with reality when the zombies break through their barricades. The anime changes some things that I want to highlight specifically because they weren't bad changes. They just had to shift a few things in light of how they were running out of time. But what really struck me most as I was reading the manga was what a faithful adaptation the anime was. While not recreated panel for panel exactly, the heart of the series and all the important character and story details survive, to the point where they really could pick up right where they left off and animate the rest of it anytime they felt like it. It's enough to make you a little crazy that it never did get picked back up, but that's a rant for another time. This expedition into the basement to save Kurumi actually isn't all that dramatic in the manga. In the anime, the zombies are driven inside by a storm, and a lightning strike on the roof starts a fire that destroys most of the apocalypse precautions that they're depending on to survive here. Yuki saves them all by getting to the school's broadcast room, where she makes a speech over the intercom, appealing to the zombies that the school day's over and it's time to go home. And miraculously, they start stumbling back out the doors. And I can practically hear the eye rolls. I know that conclusion probably sounds like the worst possible Deus Ex Machina, but it actually wasn't that bad. Throughout the story, they'd already discussed how the zombies seem to maintain at least some sort of muscle memory, mimicking the routines of their past lives. Once you get to the end, the cure ends up lying within the school's water filtration system, which explains something else the manga explores a bit, that people who were infected around this area mysteriously seem to hold on to their sentience a little longer. So yeah, the anime's end is still a little too good to be true, but there's at least an argument to be made for why it could make sense. But the real key event shared across both mediums is that this little adventure gives the girls access to the broadcast room, where they find a radio they can use to try and contact the outside world. And they succeed, but there was no way to prepare for that success. Because when the scout in the helicopter reaches the school, he doesn't see them trying to flag him down. And upon deciding there are no rescuable survivors, he turns this into a suicide mission, crashing the helicopter into the schoolyard. This crash causes a fire, designed to take out as many zombies as possible, that also takes out the school's electricity and most of their apocalypse precaution systems. And so the manga loops back around to the point where the anime ends. Now that the high school's not the safe haven it used to be, the girls hold a really poignant mini-graduation ceremony and set off for college, specifically St. Isidore Academy, another place that was marked on their map as a shelter. I didn't want to spend too much time recapping the first half of this story, but I accepted a while ago that this was going to be a long one, and I try to maintain some kind of structure when these videos get long, so if you're familiar with the manga and start to feel like things are being left out, don't panic. The plan is to get through a basic outline of the story first, and then I'll talk about things like character growth, and I'd like to close with the big picture, overall themes in the story. So, the girls get to the university, and they do find other survivors there, some more important than others, not to be harsh. The ones that welcome them in are another small group of girls who've managed to grow fairly apathetic about the state of the world. It may not be ideal, but they do have everything they need here, as well as some luxuries that weren't available at the high school. And not to go off on a tangent right after outlining a plan, but if I was adapting the rest of this series into an anime, I'd probably cut out most of their presence in the story. Narratively speaking, they're just kind of a strange addition to the tale. They end up being inspired by our younger group, seeing how much they've already faced and their will to keep fighting, but they don't end up doing anything super important to the story, and I can't say it feels like our girls learned that much in return from them. Their inclusion was kind of a slow point in the storytelling. But the reason they've been able to get so comfortable here is because there's another group of survivors on campus. This one's formed a miniature military amongst themselves. They hold regular patrols to keep the place safe and conduct full-body inspections of anyone who's stepped outside. If they find a bite or have reason to believe that person could be infected, they're immediately cast out, thrown to the zombies, if not personally killed by one of their former comrades. So our girls get settled in here, but it's another case of the peace can't last forever. Both because our crew is itching for a solution after already surviving so much on their own. More survivors must mean more answers, right? And also because an airborne strain of the infection reaches the college, which the militant faction, of course, blames on the new arrivals. When things break down at the college, the girls, along with a kind of shady scientist they met there, head out for the Randall Corporation. It was the Randall name stamped on the emergency manuals, so they suspect this is where they'll find the people with the real answers. And they're mostly right. The people associated with Randall seem to be the closest thing the world has left to an organized government. But the headquarters marked on their map is abandoned when they arrive. Their new scientist friend gets the Randall equipment up and running, though. One of the programs left behind is basically a lie detector they use to monitor all the communications they have with their contact at the new headquarters. And the results aren't reassuring. After all they've been through, what's most important to the girls is that they get to stay together wherever they go next. Since leaving the high school, Kurumi's been deteriorating physically. The medicine they found in the basement wasn't a true cure. When they decide they can't trust Randall not to take her away and experiment on her, or just kill them all as liabilities, their attention turns to figuring out the cure themselves. They've deduced the illness originated in their town. It explains why the people who grew up here seem to have some sort of partial immunity to it. There are also local legends of this infection popping up in the past. In modern times, there's at least one example of an entire infected town being wiped out by a bomb, supposedly left behind after World War II and detonated by accident. But those sorts of solutions didn't exist in ancient times, so there must be a natural cure. All the urban legends lead back to a local swamp. The bacteria that started it all originated there, but somehow got into other water supplies. The water purification system at the school was a simple design. More modern ones strip out the component that makes this bacteria safe to drink. So it started with a few infections that the government kept quiet, and by the time it adapted and went airborne it was too late. The whole world was doomed. The Randall researchers have figured out just enough to know the cause is somewhere within this town, and now the clock's ticking for the girls to find a way to get back in touch with them and reveal the solution can be found here too, before they just nuke the whole place and move on. So, let's talk about our main characters a bit, and how they continue to grow in this second half of the story. Miki was a really interesting one for me, because some of the events relegated to flashbacks in the anime are things we see play out in real time in the manga. Namely, she's not around in Volume 1, the other three rescue her from the mall in Volume 2, so more time is spent on watching her struggle to settle in at the school and accept Yuki for who she is. She's a little more standoffish in the manga, and just a lot tougher from the start. Her whole character arc in the anime is about Miki finding her courage, how she relies so much on her friends, but finally is the one to run into danger herself when Kurumi's out of commission. In the manga, she's a lot tougher from the start, because she's seen a lot more. In the anime, she's at the mall with her best friend when the infection really takes off and the whole place finds itself under attack. She and Kei hole up in an old storeroom on one of the upper floors and barricade themselves in. They stay like that for weeks, until Kei gets sick of waiting to be rescued and leaves behind Miki, who was too scared to go with her. She promises to return with help, of course, but Kei never makes it that far. She has a really great line in their final argument that sums it up perfectly. "Why is it always me? It makes me look so selfish." Kei was always the braver friend. When push came to shove, it was always up to her to make the hard decisions. Miki's anime character arc is all about toughening her up to be someone who can handle the hard decisions herself, and I think I almost prefer that way of telling her story. It turns the scene where she takes up Kurumi's shovel into such a more badass moment, versus in the manga where there was no real reason to doubt whether she could handle it, but there certainly are some striking moments in the way the manga tells that story. The big thing is that Miki and Kei aren't the only survivors initially. The mall turns into a temporary shelter for the ones who manage to get away. It's basically like life in a refugee camp, until one day someone comes back infected without realizing it. Kei had remained with Miki a bit away from the others that night, because she wasn't comfortable with how drunk they were getting, and by the time they woke up, it was too late. They managed to escape by burning the bodies of the others, and then hole up in the storeroom for the rest of the tale. Kei hardly needed an excuse to be at the end of her rope, not wanting to stay in this mall another minute, but they sure gave her one. And it makes Miki's attitude pretty understandable when she arrives at the school. She's seen a lot more of the horror that's going on out in the real world. If I'd found other survivors who'd been relatively safe all this time, I'd expect them to be working on some kind of bigger plan too. But the tensions at first do make it a little more moving to see her soften up and start to really care for her new clubmates. Kei's big thing was that she shouldn't be content just to be alive. She wanted her best friend to be willing to fight for a life that made her happy. I know I said in my review for the anime that I was really tempted to name Miki as my favorite character, but I couldn't because they're all such great characters. And that's still true, especially because the manga definitely went to work on some of them in a way the anime just didn't have time for. I liked Ri in the anime. I have a fondness for the characters who really step up and try to take care of everyone else when things get bad, but she was definitely the one the anime had the least time for. The manga gets on correcting that almost immediately. You can see she's nearing the end of her rope when she's left to watch over Kurumi, suffering from the early stages of the infection. The real break comes when the helicopter crashes, and I really can't blame her. After surviving so much, seeing rescue within reach, and then to see those hopes literally go up in flames, it would feel like a bad joke. I probably would have lost it too. The only thing to pull her back from the edge is when she notices Yuki watching her, waiting for some kind of direction like Ri always gives. And I want to cut in to talk about Yuki here because, 1, I don't have as much to say about her as the others, and 2, her growth really directly impacts the road Ri goes down. A lot about Yuki doesn't really change. She's not genuinely delusional anymore, but she does maintain a habit of channeling her memories of Megune whenever she's in a tough spot and looking for guidance. But what she definitely becomes more aware of is her role in the group. She knows now that the others depend on her to keep their spirits up, so I think the optimistic, almost oblivious air that she exudes is just a little put on after they leave the high school. To some extent, that is who Yuki just naturally is, but we see moments where she's worrying to herself, or more often to the ghost of Megune, and it's clear she feels pressured not to share those worries with the others. They've already had to spend so much time protecting her. She wants to pull her own weight now. Little did she know that protecting her was basically the last straw keeping Ri sane. She's clearly struggling by the time they leave the school. And then, on the way to the college, they pass by the local elementary school. Ri insists that they stop and search the place, and they do, but they don't find any survivors. Except then Ri sneaks back out late that night, and when she emerges from the wreckage, it's with a much younger girl. She's somehow miraculously unharmed, but too traumatized to speak. Ri starts calling her Rue, saying the girl reminds her of her little sister, and they move on, surprisingly unhindered by now having to look out for a little kid everywhere they go, right up until the militant group at the college turns on them, and one of their truly sociopathic members murders Rue while taking the older girls in for questioning. Which you'd think must surely be the last straw, but once things calm down, once things truly fall apart and the girls are getting ready to leave the college, Ri rushes back to the place where they got separated, and this time returns with the teddy bear Rue was carrying around, seeming to think the toy is Rue, which she ultimately leaves behind with one of the college girls to keep her safe. The signs were all there, honestly. I almost can't believe, looking back, that it genuinely did not occur to me that Rue might have been a hallucination all along until I got to the very end, where we finally hear the story of the real Rue, who died in a traffic accident before this zombie apocalypse even began. Ri was with her that day, and she's never gotten over the guilt of not watching her closely enough. For a while, that inner turmoil was soothed by looking after Yuki like she would a little sister. But once Yuki didn't need her so much anymore, combined with the stress of their situation, it was just a matter of time before something broke there. I think the reason I missed those signs go back to the rules of society and common logic being a little different once you move into that post-apocalyptic kind of era. I would have to go back and reread that whole stretch with Rue just to be sure, but the way I remember it, Yuki's the only one who really interacts with her, other than Ri, and enough said there. One of the biggest concepts in this whole story is how Yuki's own grasp on reality can be a little fragile. I think what really threw me off is that Miki and Kurumi never confront Ri about going over the edge. They discuss being worried about her, but they're very accepting of this being her method to cope. And in hindsight, there's nothing too surprising about that either. They've already lived through it with Yuki after all. Seeing that attitude shift onto someone who'd previously been doing a lot of the work keeping everyone else together and functioning. It's one of those details that makes the friendship element of this story so great. By the time they hit the road, these four are all on the same page. Making sure they get to stay together and all get through this is the top priority, but Kurumi falters a bit with the second part. She was already a great character in the first half of the series, setting herself apart as the group's protector. They take her character in a really interesting direction once they leave the school. I mentioned that her health started to deteriorate again, but that's not the first change she notices. She and Miki are fighting through a horde of zombies while out scouting one night when she notices they're all swarming her friend. Kurumi's skin never warmed back up to its normal temperature after the bite, and now it's like the zombies can't sense or smell her at all. They recognize her as one of their own, which set up possibly the most badass scene in the entire manga, definitely the one that stuck with me the most since completing it. Kurumi's not with the others when the militants at the college go to round them all up. One of their scouts finds her out, walking around the grounds. They've realized by this point that there's something off about her, and it's their policy to show no mercy even to their own people. So when Kurumi has no luck trying to talk him down, she starts banging on the metal bars of the fence with her trusty shovel, bringing all the zombies in the area running, of course. And as they overwhelm and kill the scout, she walks away, weaving her way through the crowd. Whenever I look back on School Live, I suspect it's always going to be that image that first comes to mind. But it was almost Kurumi's breaking point. I'm of the mind that it was the stress of the situation that caused her mental symptoms. It's understandable that she'd start to feel a little monstrous, but more importantly, she was starting to feel like a liability to her friends. She'd been wondering if it wouldn't be better for everyone if she just disappeared off into the darkness one night, and she nearly goes through with it until Yuki manages to find her and talk her down. The first moment where I could really appreciate that Yuki had grown and was a more capable version of herself now. But that concept of sacrificing something for your beliefs is really central to the overall story. The conflict at the heart of this story is about knowing when you've gone too far, sacrificed too much. At the end of the day, it's not the zombies they really have to worry about. It's figuring out how to coexist with the other survivors. With both of the main conflicts in the second half of the story, the militants at the college and the people at Randall, it comes down to the same issue. They end up losing their humanity in an effort to save humanity. There was another really great scene at the end of the college arc. In the militant leader's final moments, he starts hallucinating the ghosts of all the people he's killed. Specifically, all the people he's betrayed, the ones he cast out of their little colony, sent to their deaths in his efforts to keep everyone else safe. Even before you get his backstory, there are so few people left, it's hard to argue that the way they've handled things is worth it. His heart was in the right place, but their extreme policies ultimately made him the real monster. And then they had to deal with the Randall Corporation, apparently bombing any place they feel has gotten out of control. It wouldn't be a proper final conflict if everything didn't fall apart quite spectacularly on the way there. They arrive back at the school where it all started, with Kurumi too weak to walk, and the building properly infested now. Miki ventures out to get water and supplies, and ends up bitten herself. Ri's able to lure the zombies away, but ultimately it's up to Yuki to find a radio and get back in touch with the people at Randall. And as she gives them the basics of their situation, as she talks about how much she loves her friends and all she's learned through this ordeal, she's not exactly the most eloquent speaker. She doesn't even fully understand the cure they've found, but she reminds them of something very important, that all their big decisions affect real human beings, real people with their own hopes and dreams who've been fighting just as desperately to survive. It can be easy to forget that when you get used to looking at the situation from a distance, either a literal physical distance like the Randall Corporation executives who approach this disaster from behind their computer screens, or the emotional distance the militant group and the people working in the field have had to build up. You can't always afford to empathize with the people around you when your own life is in danger, but at what point has that distance gone too far? That's what school life is really about, maintaining your humanity under harsh conditions, though the big picture part of that lesson wasn't something I could properly appreciate until the end. Looking back, you can see the individual threads of it coming together from the very beginning. Even when it seemed like this might be a much simpler story, when it wasn't clear yet whether the mystery of the infection or the possibility of a cure would even be addressed, when it was just a couple of schoolgirls finding joy in simple things when the world outside had become a literal horror story. I can't stress enough how well this tale was told. School Live has definitely become one of the best manga I've ever completed, but I want to reiterate how much I love the anime too. Normally, it would be a bit of a blemish on the overall product for the story to be unfinished, but even before I had any plans of reading the manga, I really wasn't disappointed by the anime. There are some stories where it's okay for the ending to be the characters venturing out into the unknown. Obviously, I'm happy to have the rest of the tale, but I really would recommend both. Furthermore, I'd recommend the anime being your first experience with the series. The artwork for the manga, especially when depicting a character who's on the verge of a breakdown, is really great, but there are definitely some scenes that hit harder and are a lot more chilling in the anime. The music especially added a lot to certain scenes. This may be the last time I talk about it on this channel, but it's definitely a series I'll be rereading and rewatching in the future. Thank you for watching.